Working the night shift at a convenience store usually feels pretty routine. You expect a few customers, maybe someone trying to buy alcohol after hours, or the occasional noisy group returning from a night out. That's exactly what I had in mind as I clocked in for my shift at a small corner store in Las Vegas. While most people were winding down for the evening, my workday was just starting. I didn't mind the quiet. There's a certain rhythm to night shifts, restocking shelves, sweeping the floors, and waiting for the rare customer. I kept the radio playing softly in the background to fend off the silence. Around 1 a.m., while flipping through a magazine at the counter, I noticed them, 2 men standing under the streetlight just outside. Their shadows stretched across the pavement as they stood talking quietly. At first, I dismissed it. People often linger outside, waiting for rides or just passing time. But something about their body language, the way they kept glancing toward the store, made me uneasy. A few minutes later, one of them pointed in my direction. I quickly averted my gaze, pretending to be absorbed in the magazine, but my heart started to race. When I looked back, they were gone. Or so I thought. The bell above the door jingled a moment later, and the 2 men walked in. They moved slowly, their eyes scanning the aisles like they were sizing up the place. One was tall and lanky, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. The other was shorter and stockier, his hoodie concealing most of his features. "Evening," I said, trying to sound casual. They didn't reply. Instead, they split up. The taller one wandered toward the snack aisle, while the shorter man headed for the drink coolers. Their movements felt deliberate, calculated, like they weren't here to shop. The shorter guy was the first to approach the counter. He slapped a can of soda down and leaned in. "Slow night, huh?" "Yeah," I said, ringing up the soda. "Pretty quiet." "You here alone?" he asked, his eyes darting around the store. The question caught me off guard, but I quickly lied. "No, my coworker's in the back." I gestured toward the stockroom door. He raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder at his friend, who was now loitering near the exit. "Mind if I use your restroom?" he asked. "Sorry, it's for employees only." His expression hardened for a moment, and I thought he might argue. But then he smirked, stepping back to join his friend. As they whispered to each other near the door, my unease deepened. Something was definitely off. I reached under the counter and pressed the silent alarm button, standard protocol if anything felt suspicious. Suddenly, the taller man approached me. "You sell phone chargers?" he asked. "They're by the register," I said, gesturing to the display. As he leaned over to look, I noticed his other hand slipping out of his pocket, holding a padlock. Before I could react, he walked to the entrance, threaded a small chain through the door handles, and snapped the padlock shut with a loud click. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Relax," he said with a grin. "We just want to talk." My pulse was pounding. They had locked me in. The shorter man moved closer, positioning himself between me and the stockroom door. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "if you're not buying anything, you need to leave." "We're not going anywhere," the taller one replied, his grin widening. "Not until we're done." I didn't wait to find out what "done" meant. While they were distracted, I hit the panic button under the counter, triggering the store's alarm system. The sudden, blaring noise made both men freeze. "What the hell?" the shorter man shouted. Seizing the moment, I grabbed the pepper spray from beneath the counter and aimed it at the taller one. "Unlock the door!" I yelled. He hesitated, but when I stepped closer with the spray raised, he fumbled for the key and unlocked the padlock. I bolted out of the store, sprinting into the parking lot. Behind me, I heard glass shattering as they vented their frustration on the windows. I didn't stop running until I reached a gas station down the street, where I frantically explained what had happened. The clerk called the police, and within minutes, patrol cars were speeding toward the store. By the time officers arrived, the men were gone. But they'd left behind plenty of evidence: shattered glass, the bolt cutters they'd used, and the padlock and key. The police took my statement and promised to investigate, but the fear lingered long after. I quit the job shortly afterward. No paycheck was worth feeling that vulnerable. Looking back, I'm grateful for the training that helped me stay calm under pressure, but the experience was a harsh reminder: danger can strike even in the most mundane settings, and you can never fully predict when or where it might appear. Working as a nurse was challenging, but I loved what I did. Helping people, even under the most stressful circumstances, made the long, grueling shifts worthwhile. By the end of each day, though, I was usually drained, running on fumes. That July night had started like any other, with me clocking out late, exhausted but relieved to head home. What happened next, however, is something I'll never forget. It was just after midnight when I gathered my things, slung my bag over my shoulder, and headed for the parking lot. The hospital was eerily quiet at that hour. The halls were dimly lit and nearly empty, save for a few night shift staff quietly going about their duties. The parking lot mirrored the silence, sparsely lit by scattered lamps that cast long, warped shadows across the asphalt. My car was parked near the far end of the lot, a spot I regretted choosing every time I worked late. The humid Florida night wrapped around me like a heavy blanket as I stepped outside. The air clung to my skin, and I quickened my pace, the metallic jingle of my keys breaking the oppressive silence. About halfway to my car, I saw him. At first glance, he didn't seem noteworthy, just a man in his mid-30s wearing a baseball cap and a loose hoodie. He was pacing back and forth beneath one of the lamps, but something about his movements struck me as off. They were sharp and jittery, like he was working himself up for something. Instinctively, I picked up my pace, glancing around the lot in hopes of seeing someone else, anyone, but there was no one. It was just him and me. I could feel his eyes on me as I walked, tracking every step I took. By the time I reached my car, my pulse was racing, and I fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock the door as quickly as possible. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice cutting through the stillness. I froze, my hand hovering above the door handle. "Can you help me out?" he asked, taking a step closer. "I'm trying to find Main Street. Do you know where it is?" His tone was friendly enough, but there was something off about the way he spoke, too deliberate, too forced. I turned slightly, keeping a safe distance. "Sorry, I'm not sure," I said. "That's okay," he replied, moving closer. "Maybe you could check on your phone." I shook my head, taking a step back. "I can't help you." His demeanor shifted instantly. The friendly tone disappeared, replaced by something colder, more menacing. "Come on," he said, his voice hardening. "It'll only take a second." My heart was pounding now. I said no, I repeated, louder this time. He stopped, his gaze locking onto mine with an unsettling intensity. "Why are you being like this?" he asked, his tone dripping with mockery. That's when I saw his hand slipping into his hoodie pocket. I didn't wait to see what he was reaching for. Tightening my grip on my keys, I positioned them between my fingers like a makeshift weapon and sidestepped toward the back of my car. "I don't want any trouble," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "You don't have to make this hard," he replied, taking another step forward. Panic surged through me. My car was the only way out, but he was too close. Then I remembered the panic button on my car key fob. Without hesitation, I pressed it. The car's alarm blared, shattering the quiet. The sudden noise made him flinch, and I seized the moment to dart around the car and open the driver's side door. As I slid into the seat, he lunged toward me, slamming his hand against the window. "Turn that off," he shouted. I didn't hesitate. I started the engine, threw the car into gear, and hit the gas. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might chase after me, but as I sped out of the lot, he just stood there, watching. It wasn't until I reached the main road that I dared to glance in the rearview mirror. He was gone, but my hands were shaking, and my mind was racing with thoughts of what could have happened if I hadn't acted quickly. I pulled into a gas station a few miles away and called the police. The dispatcher asked me to describe the man and what had occurred. "Are you safe now?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. The police never found him. They told me it was probably a random predator looking for an opportunity. That explanation didn't bring me much comfort. For weeks afterward, I couldn't shake the memory. Walking to my car became a nerve-wracking routine, constantly scanning my surroundings, clutching my keys tightly, every shadow feeling like a threat. I've worked as a night security guard for nearly 10 years, and I take pride in being good at what I do. Most shifts are uneventful, a few patrols around the property, filling out paperwork, and maybe chasing off the occasional raccoon rummaging through the trash. I've always felt capable of handling any situation. But last month, something happened that shook that confidence in a way I'll never forget. The construction site I was assigned to was enormous, a sprawling expanse of steel beams, heavy machinery, and partially built structures. The night was unusually cold for Jacksonville, my breath fogging the air as I made my rounds. The site was quiet, the only sounds coming from the crunch of gravel under my boots and the faint hum of distant traffic. My flashlight cut through the darkness as I moved methodically from checkpoint to checkpoint, making sure everything was secure. Halfway through my shift, I spotted something out of place. A section of the chain-link fence near the back of the site was bent, as though someone had tried to force it open. I went over to inspect it. The damage wasn't severe, but it was fresh, I would have noticed it earlier. A shiver ran down my spine, but I told myself it was probably kids messing around. Still, I made a note to report it and continued my patrol. An hour later, as I passed the equipment yard again, my flashlight caught something, a figure standing near one of the excavators. "Hey!" I called out firmly. "This is private property, you need to leave." The figure didn't move. I stepped closer, aiming the beam of light directly at him. The moment the light hit, he darted behind the machine, disappearing into the shadows. "Stop right there!" I shouted, my pulse quickening as I jogged toward the spot. When I rounded the corner, he was gone. But lying on the ground near the excavator were two items, a pair of bolt cutters and a knife. The bolt cutters weren't unusual for a trespasser, but the knife was unsettling, a long, sharp blade that seemed out of place at a construction site. I immediately radioed my supervisor, who advised me to secure the tools and remain vigilant. The rest of the night passed without further incident, but the uneasy feeling of being watched lingered. I couldn't shake the thought that the man was still somewhere on the property. Every creak of metal or rustle in the wind made me spin around, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. The next night, I was more alert than ever. As I walked near the same area where I'd seen the figure, I noticed fresh footprints in the dirt, leading from the fence toward one of the unfinished buildings. My hand instinctively went to the pepper spray on my belt as I followed the tracks, but they disappeared near the building's entrance. I searched the area thoroughly but found nothing. It wasn't until around 3 a.m. that I saw him again, this time standing near the site's main office trailer. My heart raced as I gripped my flashlight and called out, "I see you. Step out now." No response. I approached the trailer cautiously, opening the door to find it empty. The stale air reeked faintly of cigarettes, a clear sign that someone had been there recently. Once again, he had vanished without a trace. Over the following nights, things escalated. Tools began to go missing, and I kept finding evidence of someone sneaking onto the property, discarded food wrappers, cigarette butts, and even a makeshift bedroll hidden behind a stack of pallets. What unsettled me most, though, was the growing sensation of being watched. Every time I passed the equipment yard, I could feel eyes on me, as if the intruder wasn't just trespassing but deliberately studying my routine. By the fifth night, I decided to set a trap. I placed a motion sensor near the equipment yard and found a concealed spot where I could watch without being seen. It was just after midnight when the sensor beeped, piercing the stillness. I moved quickly but quietly, flashlight off, until I was close enough to see him. He was crouched near one of the excavators, just as before. This time, I didn't call out. Instead, I crept closer, my adrenaline surging. "Gotcha!" I shouted, flipping on my flashlight. He spun around, the hood of his sweatshirt casting a shadow over his face. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and I saw something that chilled me to the core, an expression of pure malice. Without a word, he bolted, vanishing into the darkness before I could react. I immediately called the police. They arrived quickly, and we searched the site, but there was no sign of the intruder. The only thing left behind was a small, rusted key, which the officers collected as evidence. After that night, my supervisor took additional precautions, installing cameras and hiring an extra guard for the night shift. I still work as a security guard, but I'm more cautious now. Every shadow feels like a potential threat, and I've learned to never underestimate the dangers that can come with working the graveyard shift. Living and working as a farmhand in Des Moines is about as simple as life gets. The work is tough, but there's something reassuring about the steady rhythm of early mornings and quiet nights under a canopy of stars. I've been at the same farm for 3 years, and I thought I had everything about it figured out. That was until last September, when something happened that changed how I saw the place forever. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the air was thick with the earthy scent of freshly harvested corn. My boss had asked me to stay late to check on the irrigation system in the far field. It wasn't a long walk, but the cornfield felt different after dark. The tall stalks swayed gently in the breeze, their rustling leaves creating an unsettling soundtrack to the otherwise still night. I was following the dirt path with my flashlight when something flickered at the edge of its beam, a shadow moving between the rows of corn. My first thought was that one of the horses had gotten loose and wandered into the field, but the way it moved wasn't right. It was too upright. I stopped and swept my flashlight over the area, trying to catch another glimpse. "Probably just the light playing tricks," I muttered, more to calm myself than anything else. But as I turned to continue walking, I heard it, a faint rustling, like something moving through the field, matching my pace. The sound followed me all the way to the irrigation pump. I tried to brush it off as animals or the wind, but my unease was growing. Once I'd finished checking the system, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I stepped off the path and into the rows of corn, my flashlight casting long, eerie shadows around me. The crunch of my boots on the dry soil mixed with the soft rustle of the stalks, making me feel as though the field was closing in. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. "Is someone there?" No response. Just the wind and the swaying leaves. I pressed on, my flashlight scanning the rows, until I saw it, something tall and dark moving between the stalks, just out of reach of the light. My breath caught, and I froze. It wasn't an animal. It was too tall. Too human. Heart racing, I backed out of the field, the flashlight trembling in my grip. When I reached the main path, the rustling stopped. The silence that followed was heavy and unnatural. Not wanting to stick around, I hurried back to the barn, locked up, and went straight home. The next night, I told myself it was all in my head, a product of a long day and an overactive imagination. But when my boss asked me to check the far field again, I hesitated. "Everything okay?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, just tired," I replied, forcing a smile. Armed with my flashlight and a renewed sense of resolve, I headed back out. The night felt eerily similar to the one before, the same rustling stalks, the same oppressive quiet. And again, I felt it, that unnerving sensation of being watched. I stopped in my tracks, flashlight sweeping over the rows of corn. That's when I saw it again, a shadowy figure standing just beyond the first row, motionless about 20 feet away. "Hey!" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. "You're trespassing. This is private property." The figure didn't move. I stepped closer, training the flashlight on the spot where it stood. The moment the light hit it, the figure melted into the shadows, vanishing as if it had never been there. Over the next few nights, the sightings continued, each one more unsettling than the last. The figure always appeared in the same part of the field, never making a sound, never coming closer. It felt like a game of cat and mouse, one I wasn't eager to play. By the fourth night, I'd had enough. Determined to find answers, I decided to investigate during the day. The field seemed ordinary under the sunlight, the corn swaying innocently in the breeze. But when I reached the area where I'd seen the figure, I noticed something strange. The stalks in that section were flattened, as if someone, or something, had been standing there for a long time. I crouched down to inspect the ground and found footprints. They were human, but far larger than any I'd ever seen. The tracks led deeper into the field before vanishing among the rows of corn. That night, when my boss asked me to check the far field again, I couldn't refuse. This time, I clutched my flashlight tightly, scanning every shadow with heightened vigilance. The figure appeared again, closer than ever, just 10 feet away. Its outline was barely visible in the darkness, but it was unmistakable. I froze, the flashlight shaking in my hand. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" It didn't respond. Instead, it turned silently and walked into the field, the stalks parting and swaying as it moved. The next day, I reported the sightings to my boss, but he brushed it off. "Probably just a drifter," he said with a shrug. "They pass through here all the time." But I knew it wasn't just a drifter. Whatever I had seen wasn't normal. I left the farm later that fall, but every time I pass a cornfield now, I can't help but glance at the rows, half expecting to see that shadowy figure again.